The day Margaret died, the house was silent in a way that pierced the soul. The phone calls, the flowers, the neighbors' somber visits, they all blurred into background noise. But the one person whose presence I expected, my son Tyler, was nowhere to be found. I had called him repeatedly, leaving messages filled with urgency and grief. The preparations for her funeral were underway. The caterer was confirmed, the church booked, her favorite lilies arranged just as she would have wanted. But Tyler? Silence. Hey there, thanks for tuning in. I've got a question before we begin. Where in the world are you watching from? I see people joining from all over, and it's amazing. Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you love powerful stories filled with betrayal, truth, and revenge, hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure your notifications are on, because this one is gonna hit hard. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he was busy. Maybe traffic. Maybe he didn't realize how soon things would move. But the truth hit me like ice water when I received the photos. Tyler, smiling broadly, a glass of champagne in his hand, posing beside Brittany at a sunlit resort in Scottsdale, Arizona. Today, the very day we were arranging Margaret's funeral. The very day he should have been there, not for a vacation, not for a party, not for his wife's birthday celebration, but for his mother. I dropped my coffee cup. The ceramic shattered, pieces skittering across the kitchen floor, echoing the fractures inside me. Betrayal wasn't a strong enough word. Indifference wasn't enough. My own son had chosen celebration over the final farewell to his mother. I sank into a chair, staring at the phone, staring at the screen, staring at the empty space where my child should have been. And then a wave of anger washed over me. Every memory of Tyler as a boy, laughing, curious, kind, flashed in my mind. Every one of those memories seemed to mock me now. Even in Scottsdale, even in Brittany's glow, there were signs I couldn't ignore. The photos, carefully staged, revealed Tyler's posture and expressions, stiff, hesitant, a hint of unease behind the manufactured smiles. Brittany's hand rested lightly on his arm, guiding, controlling, shaping. Tyler was not in command. He had been led here, choosing comfort and indulgence over respect for the woman who had given him life. I called the caterer again, double-checking the schedule, trying to ground myself in the reality of what had to be done. The church staff reassured me that the arrangements were intact, but each confirmation felt hollow. Tyler's absence was louder than any words, louder than any music, louder than the carefully rehearsed steps of the funeral preparations. That evening, I found myself walking through the home, touching the walls Margaret had loved. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly in the air. I held on to a letter she had left, folded neatly on the kitchen counter, its edges worn. "Remember who you are. Never let anger cloud your judgment," it read. I repeated the words silently, letting them anchor me. I would not act recklessly. I would act with precision. Still, the questions gnawed at me. Why would Tyler do this? Why would he abandon family for a party? Was it just carelessness or something deeper? The answer came slowly, in the way he moved, the way he smiled, the way Brittany leaned in, directing him. Tyler was being controlled, influenced, guided. And yet, even with this knowledge, the betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined. I started keeping a journal that night. Each social post, each photograph, each tag was noted meticulously. Tyler's indulgence became a map, Brittany's influence a pattern. I could see how carefully orchestrated it all was,
Tyler smiling for the camera, nodding along, unaware of the consequences he was leaving behind.
Then came the first hint that this was bigger than just Tyler and Brittany. An unmarked envelope appeared on my doorstep late one night. Inside, a photograph of Tyler outside a courthouse, shaking hands with a man I did not recognize. On the back, in hurried handwriting, "He isn't as smart as he thinks. Watch closely." Someone else was at play. Someone who had stakes in Tyler's life. Someone shaping events from the shadows. My grief was no longer the only thing fueling me. Now, strategy and awareness took center stage. In the following days, the photos continued to arrive online. Smiling faces, sparkling champagne, sunlit smiles, all contrasted sharply with the lilies and candlelight waiting for Margaret's funeral. Tyler's world seemed oblivious to what he had ignored. And Brittany, I realized, had orchestrated it all. His absence, his distractions, his choices. Even as anger surged, I reminded myself of Margaret's words. I would not act impulsively. I would wait, I would watch, I would prepare. Tyler had chosen indulgence over family, but he would learn the weight of that choice. Every day I observed. The first cracks in Tyler's composure became visible. A hesitation, a forced smile, a glance away from the camera. He was beginning to realize, in his own way, that the world he had chosen was not immune to consequence. And in that observation, I found the first seed of satisfaction. Revenge is not about confrontation or shouts. It is about patience, timing, and precision. Tyler's betrayal had revealed his true character. Now it was my job to let the consequences unfold, carefully, deliberately, until he could no longer ignore them. Because this was only the beginning. If your own child ever skipped a funeral to attend a party, how would you react? Would you confront them immediately or wait for the right moment? Think about it and let me know your thoughts in the comments section.
The days after Margaret's funeral were filled with routine chaos, yet in the midst of it, I became an observer. Tyler returned home, but not for family, not for mourning. He returned as if nothing had happened, carrying himself with an air of confidence that grated against my nerves. Yet beneath it, I could see the first cracks, subtle gestures, hesitations, glances that betrayed unease. I began with the simplest tools: social media, financial records, and casual conversations. Tyler had no idea I was watching so closely. Each post was a breadcrumb, each story a clue. Vacations, dinners, events, celebrations, every detail was cataloged, every pattern noted. Brittany's influence on him became increasingly clear. She was everywhere in his life, suggesting investments, approving business decisions, even steering conversations at social gatherings. The posts on Instagram and Facebook weren't just about appearances. They were carefully curated, almost staged. I could see Tyler's compliance, the subtle tension behind his smiles. One evening, I sat in my study, scrolling through Tyler's latest posts. A photo of him shaking hands with a group of businessmen in Scottsdale caught my attention. At first glance, it seemed like a routine networking event. But then I noticed Brittany standing just behind him, whispering into his ear, her hand lightly on his shoulder. She wasn't just accompanying him, she was guiding him, controlling him. The realization hit me harder than I expected. My son, whom I had raised to be independent and strong, was being quietly manipulated by a woman who seemed to have no concern for the bonds he had broken. And yet, I couldn't feel just anger. I had to feel strategy, observation, patience. I began tracking his financial movements, not to embarrass him publicly, not yet, but to understand the scope of his choices. Tyler was making errors, not monumental mistakes, but enough to create leverage in the right moment. Small oversights, unchecked expenses, reliance on Brittany for guidance, they were all visible to me, and I documented everything meticulously.
Then a new element appeared, one I hadn't anticipated. An anonymous message. It came through email, subject line blank, sender unknown. I opened it carefully. You see him now, but you don't know the full board. Someone else is moving pieces behind him. Watch closely. The message was simple, cryptic, and unnerving. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. Tyler's mistakes were not entirely his own. There was another player, someone working in the shadows, influencing events. This changed everything. I wasn't just dealing with a careless, entitled son. I was dealing with a manipulated pawn in a game I had only begun to understand. I felt frustration, yes, but also a certain exhilaration. The path to revenge was no longer straightforward, but complexity breeds opportunity. Every step I had planned, every observation, every note in my journal now took on new significance. I needed patience, I needed a strategy, and most of all, I needed to ensure Tyler's vulnerabilities became visible, both to himself and, eventually, to those who mattered. Over the next few days, I continued to monitor him discreetly. Tyler appeared carefree, attending social events with a forced charm, but cracks began to surface. A hesitation during conversations, a misstep in a business decision, a subtle glance at Brittany as if seeking permission before acting. Each sign confirmed what I already suspected. He was controlled, yes, but the cracks in his armor were growing. I began attending a few of the same public events, blending in quietly among the crowd. Tyler didn't notice me, but I noticed him. Every handshake, every laugh, every exchange of money or information was scrutinized. Brittany's influence was evident everywhere, her presence almost magnetic, guiding Tyler like a conductor with a symphony he didn't fully understand. I documented everything in my journal. Names, dates, events, even the exact phrasing of conversations I could overhear. I wasn't just keeping records, I was building a map of Tyler's world. Late one night, I reviewed the notes again, my mind working through possible scenarios. The anonymous email loomed in my thoughts. Who was the hidden manipulator? Was it someone connected to Brittany or someone else entirely? And most importantly, how could I use this knowledge to ensure Tyler fully understood the consequences of his choices? I realized revenge would not come through confrontation alone. It would come through exposure, through strategic leverage, and through ensuring that every choice Tyler had made, or failed to make, would weigh heavily upon him. The errors, the indulgences, the moments of weakness, all of it would matter. As I closed my journal, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. This was no longer just about grief or anger. It was about precision. It was about justice. And it was about ensuring that Tyler, for the first time, felt the true weight of his absence, his compliance, and his choices. Would you sit silently while someone you love destroyed themselves? Or would you intervene immediately? Think carefully. And while you do, share this video with someone who needs to hear this, because the secrets I've uncovered are only just beginning to reveal themselves. And so I waited, watching, recording, planning. Every smile, every hesitation, every subtle interaction between Tyler and Brittany became a piece of a puzzle I intended to solve. The longer I observed, the clearer the pattern became. Tyler's life was built on appearances,
And appearances can be dismantled, carefully, deliberately, with the precision only time and patience can provide. Because in this game, knowledge was power, patience was weapon, and every secret I uncovered brought me one step closer to the moment Tyler would truly see the consequences of his choices. The quiet tension grew, a pressure building beneath the surface. Tyler didn't know it yet, but his world was shifting, and I was ready.
The invitation was simple: dinner at my home. Tyler didn't hesitate to accept. He believed it was a casual family catch-up, a way to soothe over the awkward tension after Margaret's funeral. He arrived in the late afternoon, dressed neatly, polished, and with that familiar confidence that had always made me cautious. But I could see the tension behind his eyes, the first cracks forming, subtle, almost imperceptible. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the quiet hum of the evening settling around us. The room smelled faintly of Margaret's favorite vanilla candles, and for a moment the grief clawed at me again. I pushed it aside, letting focus take over. This dinner was not about conversation, it was about planting seeds. "Tyler," I began softly, pouring a glass of water, "it's good to have you here. I wanted to talk." He smiled nervously, adjusting his cufflinks. "Of course, Dad. I know things have been difficult. I wanted to make it right." I nodded, watching him carefully. "You mean after the funeral?" My voice was calm, almost indifferent, but the weight in it was unmistakable. Tyler shifted in his seat, a small crack forming in the armor of his confidence. I know I should have been there. I know it looks bad, but "You skipped the preparations," I interrupted, letting my tone linger. Not angry, just factual. "You weren't there when everything had to be arranged, when people counted on you. And instead," I let the words hang in the air, heavy. "Instead, you went to Scottsdale for Brittany's birthday." Tyler's eyes flickered. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no defense, at least not a truthful one. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, subtle but telling. He was beginning to feel the first pangs of guilt. I didn't think," he stammered. "Of course you didn't," I said softly, leaning back. "But Tyler, that's not all." I paused, letting my gaze pierce him. "I've been watching. I know how things have been happening. Your decisions, they aren't entirely your own, are they?" His posture stiffened. "What do you mean?" "You've been guided," I said calmly, choosing each word like a scalpel. "Not by me, not by anyone you'd expect. Brittany. And someone else." I let the silence linger, feeling the tension coil around us. Tyler swallowed. His confidence was fading, replaced with confusion and unease. I don't understand." "You are not in full control, Tyler. You're a pawn, a man guided by another, unknowingly following a plan laid by someone else. Do you realize how much of your life has been influenced without you even noticing?" He looked down at his hands, trembling slightly. I thought I was doing the right things." "Right for whom?" I asked softly, leaning forward. "For yourself? For Brittany? Or for the people who have quietly been steering your life from the shadows?" Tyler's face paled. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he knew deep down I was telling the truth. He had been complicit in his own manipulation. His choices had seemed free, but they were guided, and now the realization of his role as a pawn settled over him like a weight he couldn't shrug off. I watched him struggle internally, every subtle shift in expression telling me he was beginning to grasp the depth of his situation. And yet, I knew this was only the beginning. He still did not fully understand the scale of the game he was caught in.
The manipulator was still hidden, the final consequences still out of sight. "You've been lucky," I continued, my voice low, almost gentle. "Lucky that the consequences haven't hit you fully yet. But Tyler, luck doesn't last forever. Every mistake, every indulgence, every time you follow someone else's hand, it builds. And eventually, it will catch up with you." Tyler's hands clenched into fists on the table. His facade of control was crumbling. I could see it in the tight line of his jaw, the slight shake of his hands, the way his eyes darted as though searching for escape. For the first time, he felt fear. The fear of accountability, of exposure, of consequences. And then I leaned back, letting the tension breathe. This dinner isn't about punishment yet. It's about awareness. You need to understand where you stand, and you need to see who's really shaping your life. Only then can you begin to make real choices, if that's even possible. Tyler swallowed, nodding faintly. He was no longer the confident man who had laughed in Scottsdale. He was a boy, confronted with truths he had ignored, truths he had never been ready to face.
I watched him carefully. "The first lesson is simple," I said. "Not all guidance is good. Not all influence is kind. And sometimes the people you trust most aren't the ones pulling the strings." He looked up at me, eyes wide. "You mean Brittany?" I shook my head slightly. "She's part of it, but there's someone else, someone you don't know. Someone whose influence is quiet, subtle, and powerful. And that's why this is not as simple as just correcting your mistakes. This is a game with layers, and you are at the center of it." Tyler sat back, pale and silent, the realization sinking in. His arrogance, his casual confidence, all of it was stripped away in moments of understanding. For the first time, he was vulnerable. And for the first time, I could see the path to the revenge that had been building since Margaret's death. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, but I allowed it to linger. I didn't rush. I didn't push further. The seed of doubt, fear, and guilt had been planted. Tyler's mind would churn over it long after he left the table, and I knew that patience, observation, and precision would turn that seed into full awareness and eventually reckoning. Finally, I spoke, letting my words land slowly. "Remember this, Tyler. You are not the master of your life. You've been playing a part written by others, and soon you will see the full story, not from me, but from the consequences you've ignored for far too long." Tyler nodded silently, unable to speak. His facade had cracked, and the first real shift had occurred. The pawn now understood he was part of a much larger game, and I, patient, focused, and deliberate, knew that the first move of many had been successful. Have you ever realized someone you trusted wasn't truly in control of their own life? How would you handle it? Comment below with your thoughts. Hit like if you can relate, and subscribe for the next chapter, because what happens next will reveal just how deep the manipulation really goes.
The days that followed Tyler's private dinner were quiet, almost deceptively so. To an outside observer, life continued as normal. Tyler attending meetings, laughing at brunches, scrolling through social media, and Brittany planning her next public appearance. But underneath the surface, the first ripples of consequence were forming, and I was the one carefully directing the current. I began with anonymous tips, small things at first, almost imperceptible. A subtle mention to a business associate about an overdue report, a quiet nudge to a neighbor about a minor social faux pas. Nothing that could be traced back to me,
but enough to make Tyler notice that the world he had taken for granted was beginning to respond in unexpected ways. It was fascinating, watching him slowly unravel. At first, he brushed it off with arrogance, convincing himself it was coincidence, bad luck, nothing personal. But then came the subtle, undeniable patterns. A missed opportunity at work, a friend expressing disappointment at a careless comment, a client hinting at unreliability. Tyler's composure, once so unshakable, began to show signs of strain. I didn't act openly. I watched from the sidelines, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of justice unfolding. Every error Tyler had ignored, every indulgence he had allowed, was now coming back to him not with the ferocity of punishment, but with the quiet, unavoidable weight of natural consequence.
Tyler began to notice the world shifting around him, but he didn't yet see the full picture. He blamed luck, coincidence, or small errors, but the truth was far more deliberate. I had learned patience from Margaret's example, and I applied it now. Revenge was not about shouting, exposing, or humiliating. It was about creating conditions where the person finally understood the weight of their choices, and Tyler was on that path. One evening, I watched from my study as Tyler left the office after a meeting. He had a stack of papers under his arm and an air of confidence that now seemed forced, strained. The company newsletter had published a minor oversight in his department, something trivial but noticeable to those paying attention. His colleagues exchanged glances, whispers passing just out of earshot. Tyler's eyes flicked nervously, sensing the murmurs but unable to pinpoint their origin. I smiled faintly. The first public consequence had been delivered. The ripples were spreading. He was beginning to panic, but he didn't yet understand why. The next morning, another subtle wave arrived. A small financial oversight he had made weeks ago resurfaced through a client inquiry, flagged quietly in a way that seemed accidental, but wasn't. Tyler's phone buzzed continuously that day. Each message a reminder that the world he had controlled was starting to slip. And Brittany's influence began to falter. I could see the strain when Tyler called her, seeking guidance he hadn't yet realized he needed. Her tone was sharp, defensive, her usual calm confidence shaken. It was the first crack in her carefully constructed persona. For someone who had orchestrated so much control over Tyler, this moment of uncertainty was telling. She, too, was not immune to the consequences of the moves she had encouraged.
I allowed myself a quiet laugh one evening, alone in my study, not cruelly, but with satisfaction. This was justice unfolding slowly, methodically, and without haste. Tyler's life, carefully curated and indulgent, was beginning to reveal its vulnerabilities. And Brittany, for all her confidence, was starting to see that influence comes with responsibility and exposure. The subtlety of it all was important. I did not want Tyler to suspect my involvement yet. He needed to feel that the world was reacting naturally to his mistakes, that the consequences were emerging without any visible hand. This made the realization later all the more profound. I documented everything, as I always had. Social missteps, small errors, reactions of colleagues and friends, Brittany's subtle slips. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle, each consequence a thread in the web I was weaving. Slowly, deliberately, the pattern became clear, both to me and, soon enough, to Tyler. One evening, I received another anonymous message, similar in tone to the first. The pieces are moving. Watch how the pawn reacts when the board shifts. He doesn't yet understand the hand guiding him. It was confirmation that the hidden manipulator was still at work, but now I had leverage. Tyler's small missteps, Brittany's cracks, and the whispers spreading quietly in social and professional circles, all of it would converge. The pressure on him would build,
and he would feel it without knowing its origin. The satisfaction I felt was tempered by patience. This was not the climax. It was preparation. The more Tyler panicked, the more the hidden manipulator's influence began to show, and the more control I gained over the timing of the next steps. Every mistake he made was a lesson, every moment of panic a step toward understanding. By the end of the week, Tyler's composure had changed dramatically. The casual arrogance, the forced smiles, the unchecked confidence, they were replaced with hesitation, uncertainty, and a growing awareness that something was shifting around him. He didn't yet know the full extent of my observation, the subtle nudges I had orchestrated, and the threads of consequence slowly tightening, but the tension was palpable. And Brittany, once unshakable, now faltered under the pressure. The cracks in her control were evident to anyone paying attention. Tyler's dependency on her decisions became more obvious, and the first real seeds of doubt had been planted in both their lives.
It started subtly, as all good reversals do. A misplaced report here, a small financial error there, whispers in Tyler's social circle. But as the week progressed, those tiny ripples transformed into waves that Tyler could no longer ignore. His carefully curated life, once a fortress of appearances and confidence, was crumbling, and I watched with measured satisfaction. The first public sign appeared at the office, a minor client meeting, one that Tyler had prepared for meticulously, or so he thought, went sideways. A detail he had overlooked, something trivial yet significant, caused the client to raise concerns in front of the team. Tyler's face flushed red, his hands shook slightly as he tried to recover, and colleagues exchanged glances. The whispers began, soft at first, then louder, spreading like wildfire. I wasn't behind every misstep, but I had planted enough subtle nudges, tips, and reminders to make it appear as if fate itself was conspiring against him. Tyler, once confident in his abilities, now felt exposed. His arrogance faltered, replaced with doubt, panic, and a creeping awareness that he was losing control. At the same time, his social life began to crumble. Invitations to gatherings disappeared. Whispers of past misdeeds resurfaced, and friends who had once celebrated his success now hesitated to associate with him. It was a slow burn, a methodical dismantling of the world he had taken for granted. And all the while, Brittany's influence became more visible and more dangerous. The twist came unexpectedly. One evening I received another anonymous message, this one more revealing. She's not just guiding him, she's working with us. Every decision you've noticed, every step he takes is coordinated. Brittany and the hidden manipulator are partners. The words hit me like a shockwave. Brittany wasn't just a controlling presence, she was an active participant, an agent of the hidden manipulator. The realization reshaped the entire battlefield. Tyler was trapped, not between right and wrong, but between two forces, each tugging at his life in different directions.
I considered my options carefully. The satisfaction of seeing Tyler's vulnerabilities emerge was tempered by the knowledge that Brittany's partnership with the unseen manipulator made him more dangerous, more unpredictable. Every decision I had forced into motion could now have unintended consequences. And yet, the tension was intoxicating. This was the climax of a long, patient game, and I was ready to escalate further. The next day, I began to test the public waters. A financial misstep Tyler had made weeks earlier was brought to the attention of a local news outlet, not directly by me, but through an anonymous tip, carefully worded to appear accidental. The story was small, almost innocuous, but it was enough to make Tyler's colleagues and friends take notice. He was forced to respond, fumbling over explanations that only made the situation worse. At the same time, social repercussions multiplied. A minor scandal, something Tyler had assumed buried, resurfaced online. Photos he had not wanted public, comments he had thought deleted, all appeared in subtle but noticeable ways. His reputation, carefully constructed over years, began to show cracks. And Brittany? She began to panic. For someone who thrived on control, Brittany's reactions were telling. I watched her closely as Tyler called her for guidance. The confidence in her voice faltered, replaced by irritation and uncertainty. Even as she attempted to manage the chaos, it was clear that the partnership with the hidden manipulator was fraying. The cracks in her armor were evident, the subtle signs of stress and impatience leaking through the public persona she worked so hard to maintain.
Tyler, now fully aware that he was trapped, began to realize the gravity of his situation. He was caught between the consequences my patience had orchestrated and the hidden manipulator's influence he could not yet identify. Every step he took seemed to worsen the pressure, and every attempt to regain control only highlighted his vulnerabilities further. It was during a late-night phone call with Brittany that Tyler's panic became palpable. "I don't know what to do anymore," he admitted, his voice trembling. "Everything's falling apart and I can't figure out who's behind it. I feel like I'm being pushed from all sides." I smiled quietly, listening from a distance. He was finally beginning to understand. His life, once so controlled and curated, was now a battlefield he had never been trained to navigate. And I, patient, deliberate, and calculated, had orchestrated the conditions for this reckoning. The next morning brought the final confirmation of the public consequences. A business associate confronted Tyler in front of peers about the errors and the missteps at the office. And the missteps at the office were discussed openly during a meeting. Even his social circle began to notice the changes. Friends whispered, colleagues questioned, and Tyler could no longer hide behind charm or arrogance. He was exposed. I didn't rush to intervene. Every misstep, every faltering attempt to regain control, every moment of doubt and panic was part of the lesson. The father's revenge was no longer theoretical. It was unfolding in real time. And the more Tyler struggled, the clearer it became that Brittany's control, while formidable, was insufficient to shield him from the consequences he had long ignored. By the evening, Tyler was a man transformed, not broken, but humbled, vulnerable, and painfully aware that his life was no longer entirely his own. Between my careful orchestration and the hidden manipulator's influence, he had nowhere to turn. And I, watching quietly, recording every detail, every reaction, knew that the stage was set for the final moves.
The knock at the door was hesitant, almost apologetic. I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I listened, letting the seconds stretch. When Tyler's voice called out, I could hear the tremor in it, a mixture of fear, guilt, and desperation. "Dad, please, can we talk?" I opened the door slowly, the hallway light casting long shadows over his face. He looked smaller than I remembered, his confident posture replaced by tension and uncertainty. His eyes, once so assured and untouchable, now darted nervously, searching for reassurance, forgiveness, or perhaps a way to escape the weight of his own choices. He stepped inside, hands slightly trembling, a notebook clutched tightly as if it were a shield. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted quietly. "Everything's falling apart. Work, friends. I've ruined things. And I can't figure out how to make it right." I gestured for him to sit, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence itself carried the weight of the consequences he had been avoiding for so long. Tyler felt it immediately. Every hesitation, every small failure, every ripple of social and professional loss now pressed against him. I never realized. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought, Brittany, I didn't see it, Dad. I didn't see what I was letting happen. And now, I've lost everything. I don't know where to turn. I leaned back in my chair, watching him carefully. I could feel the power shift subtly in the room. Tyler was no longer the confident, unshakable man who had laughed at Scottsdale while his mother lay in her final rest. He was a man humbled, cornered by the consequences of choices he had ignored for so long. I understand, I said finally, my voice calm, measured. You understand what you've done, what you've ignored, and the peoples whose lives you've impacted. That's the first step. Tyler swallowed hard. His throat moved, words failing him. I came to beg you. Please. I need guidance. I need, I don't know, forgiveness, maybe? I don't know what I deserve. I studied him silently. There was a fine line here, between mercy and justice, between guidance and punishment. His desperation was raw, unfiltered, and it revealed everything he had been hiding from himself. Yet, I knew the hidden manipulator was still at work. Tyler was trapped in a triangle of influence: my quiet control, Brittany's manipulation, and the unseen force guiding her. Every choice he made was still constrained, and the full truth remained elusive.
"You've seen the consequences," I said softly, letting each word land. "Not just the mistakes, but the losses, the doubts, the fear. This is what happens when you allow others to guide your life unchecked, when you ignore responsibility for your actions." Tyler's hands tightened into fists on his knees. I understand now. I see how much I've lost, Dad. Socially, morally, I can't fix everything, but I want to make it right. Please, I need your guidance." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let him sit in silence, feeling the weight of his own guilt pressing down. Every shift in his expression, every tremor in his voice, every sign of internal struggle was evidence of the first true recognition of his failures. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. I never thought I'd end up like this. I'm trapped. I can't undo the past, but I want to learn, to do better. Please, Dad, help me." I leaned forward slightly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him squirm under the awareness of how far he had fallen. This was the power of observation, of patience, of letting someone confront themselves without interference. Tyler needed to feel the consequences fully, not through my words, but through the weight of reality. You've been given the chance to see clearly. You've been shown how your choices have shaped your life. You've realized that indulgence, complacency, and blind obedience have costs. That understanding is yours now. Whether you rise or continue to falter is up to you. Tyler nodded, swallowing hard, tears threatening to spill. I see it now. I see Brittany. I see the manipulations. And I can't blame anyone else entirely. I have to take responsibility. I want to try. I beg you, Dad. I need your guidance. Please, don't give up on me.
The tension in the room was thick. The emotional stakes were high, both for Tyler and for me. This was the moment where patience, revenge, and moral authority converged. I had the power now to forgive, to guide, or to deliver the final strike of lessons long in preparation. But the hidden manipulator still loomed, influencing the shadows of Tyler's life, making every decision risky and uncertain. I let my gaze linger on him, noting the vulnerability, the honesty, and the cracks that had formed over weeks of observation, subtle sabotage, and public exposure. Tyler was a different man now, humbled,
aware, desperate. The power dynamics had shifted. For the first time, he truly understood how much he had lost and how fragile the control he once wielded really was. "You've come this far," I said quietly. "That in itself is proof that awareness can grow, that responsibility can emerge. But know this, learning the lessons of life is not about comfort, it's about accountability, and the path ahead is yours to navigate." Tyler nodded again, tears finally slipping down his face. I understand, Dad. Thank you for not shutting me out completely." I allowed a small, controlled nod. The satisfaction of justice unfolding slowly mingled with anticipation. He had reached out. He had recognized his guilt. He had seen the cracks in Brittany, the influence of the hidden manipulator, and the consequences of his own choices. But the final chapter, the reckoning, was yet to come.
The house was quiet that evening, the soft glow of the lamps casting long, gentle shadows across the living room. I sat back in my chair, reflecting on the weeks that had passed, the careful observation, the small nudges, the public exposures, and the emotional reckoning that Tyler had faced. There was satisfaction, yes, justice, finally, in its slow and deliberate form. Tyler had experienced the consequences of his choices, confronted the truth about his life, and recognized the manipulations that had guided him. Yet, even as I allowed myself a small measure of quiet triumph, a shadow lingered, a sense that the story was far from over. And then it came. A message, delivered as if the universe itself had intervened. No sender, no name, just a single line on a small piece of paper tucked into my mailbox. "The game is far from over. Watch closely." I held it in my hand, reading the words repeatedly. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. The hidden manipulator, the force that had quietly influenced Tyler's life alongside Brittany, was still active. Despite all my careful planning, all my patience and observation, there was a player still at large, guiding events from the shadows. The weight of the message pressed down like a physical presence. I folded it carefully, placing it on the table in front of me, and leaned back in my chair. Tyler's journey had reached a pivotal point, but it was not yet complete. He had been humbled, exposed, and guided to self-awareness, but the unseen influence remained, a threat, a mystery, a challenge waiting to be revealed.
I thought back to Brittany as well. Her role had been partially revealed, yet even she could not control everything. The cracks I had seen in her confidence hinted at frustration and fear. She too was part of a larger game, constrained by the manipulator's design. Tyler had faced consequences, but he was still caught in a triangle of control, and the full truth was yet to be discovered. As I reflected, my thoughts returned to the lessons of revenge and justice. Revenge, I realized, was not simply about punishment. It was about awareness, forcing those who had ignored responsibility to confront the full scope of their actions. Justice, however, was never straightforward. There were always hidden hands, forces unseen, and players whose motives were unclear. The line between satisfaction and caution blurred, and patience remained the greatest weapon. I recalled Tyler's face during our last encounter. Pale, desperate, vulnerable. The fear and guilt etched into his expression had been satisfying, yet it was tempered by the knowledge that the manipulator still pulled strings, shaping his responses, guiding his decisions. This revelation left me both empowered and wary. My own moves had been effective, but the unseen hand represented a puzzle yet to be solved. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the trees. The house, silent and still, seemed to echo the uncertainty of the days ahead. Tyler's life, now punctuated by mistakes and social exposure, was no longer entirely under his control, yet he was far from free. Brittany's influence was weakened but not eliminated, and the hidden manipulator's presence loomed like a shadow waiting to strike.
I could feel the tension in the air, a quiet anticipation that suggested the next moves would be critical. Every observation, every small consequence I had orchestrated was part of a larger pattern, and yet the final picture remained incomplete. The manipulator's motives, identity, and ultimate goal were unknown. This uncertainty heightened the suspense, both in my mind and for anyone who might witness the unfolding story. I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the nature of power and control. Tyler had been arrogant, careless, and blind to the consequences of his choices. He had allowed others, Brittany and the manipulator, to steer his life. Yet, through careful observation, subtle guidance, and strategic patience, I had shifted the balance. Revenge had been measured, deliberate, and effective. Still, the message reminded me that control was never absolute, and the game was far from over. The cryptic warning lingered in my thoughts. Who was the hidden manipulator? What was their next move? And how far would Tyler have to go before he fully understood the forces shaping his life? Each question weighed heavily, yet carried a magnetic pull, drawing me into contemplation and planning. I considered the future carefully. My own role, while powerful, was limited by the unseen presence influencing events. Patience, strategy, and observation had brought me this far, but I could not act recklessly. Every step needed to be precise, every move deliberate, ensuring that Tyler's reckoning would be complete and that the manipulator's influence could be countered, or at least anticipated. Yet even as I planned, a thrill of suspense ran through me. This was the essence of the game, the delicate balance between control and uncertainty, revenge and justice, knowledge and mystery. The story was far from finished, and the next moves would determine not only Tyler's fate, but the revelation of the unseen manipulator's identity.
I glanced at the photograph of Margaret on the mantelpiece, her serene smile a stark contrast to the turbulence surrounding Tyler's life. Her memory had been my compass, guiding me through grief and fueling the measured justice I now administered. The lessons she had imparted, patience, observation, understanding human nature, had proven invaluable. And yet, even her wisdom could not fully illuminate the hidden forces still at work. As the night deepened, I allowed myself a rare smile. The path ahead was uncertain, yes, but the stakes were high, the suspense intoxicating, and the potential for revelation immense. Tyler had begun to understand his vulnerability, Brittany's cracks were evident, and the hidden manipulator remained a tantalizing mystery. The game was far from over, and I would watch closely, ready for the next phase.